Hey there, I'm Igor Smirnov, and this is the second part of the lesson Gems from Anand-Gelfand World Championship match. Here we'll keep observing the most exciting and, more importantly, the most instructive moments and ideas from this recent World Championship match. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is the position from the fourth game Gelfand-Anand. Of course the situation is pretty even, but nevertheless White is a bit more active. White is putting pressure on Black with his two powerful bishops, and Black still needs to be careful to equalize a position completely. For example, if Black makes a careless move g6, trying to push away one of these powerful bishops, White could simply take bishop takes g6, and this leads to an immediate disaster for Black. If we continue this line, then after f takes, White obviously recaptures, and on the next move he can take the knight, and White is winning easily. It just shows that still everything is not that simple for Black. Okay, let's go back. Thus, the main thing Black should care about is how to neutralize White's active bishops. This often becomes a guiding idea for you in such situations, when you face opponent's two active bishops. With that in mind, Black played bishop c5, trying to put the bishop onto d4 and enforce the exchange of the dark squared bishops. So you may like to remember this idea. If your opponent has two bishops, it's useful for you to trade one of them. There is another instructive aspect here also. White could take onto f6, forcing Black to weaken his pawn structure. Black really has to capture with a pawn, because queen f6 loses immediately after rook e8 check, bishop f8, bishop h7 check, and on the next move rook takes f8 mate. Since this is obviously losing, Black has to take onto f6 with a pawn. It will look like this. I know a lot of players who would reject this line for Black, thinking that it is too risky. Really quite a lot of amateur players afraid to disrupt the pawn structure around their king. Although it makes sense, but it's not always correct. True, when your king is more exposed, of course it raises opponent's chances to organize a successful attack. At the same time, you should also ask yourself another important question. How many attackers has White into this position? In fact, the only active piece in the White's camp is the bishop onto f5, which doesn't create any real problems for Black. Other two pieces are sitting on the first rank and are far away from the Black's king. Let's imagine what can White do to try to somehow attack the opponent's monarch. First, White will probably need to bring the queen somewhere to e4 and then to g4. After that, Black will go king f8 or king h8. So still there will be no real threats for Black. It means that after that, White will have to somehow put the queen onto h5 and try to bring the rook into the attack with something like rook e4 and then rook to g4. Of course, this is a too long plan. It requires so many moves that this is an impracticable task. Black can take the control over the fourth rank by playing rook d4, and it will require only one move. All in all, this means that White has no chances for attack in this position. Moreover, on the next move, Black will play rook d2, and potentially Black will become an attacker, putting pressure on the White's f2 pawn and his kingside in general. In conclusion, you shouldn't afraid a weakness as itself. Instead, you need to take into account whether opponent has enough attackers to exploit those weaknesses. And if he doesn't, then this weakness is not really weak and it's not a problem for you. In the actual game, Gelfand played queen to c2, and here Anand accomplished his plan successfully. After bishop to d4, White can't really avoid an exchange of bishops, and this equalizes the position completely. If White tries to somehow retreat, something like bishop to d2, then here Black has a nice winning tactics, Can you see it? Yes, this is a discovered attack. Bishop takes f2, following with rook takes d2, winning the white's queen. If white tries to retreat in another way, if he goes bishop to b4, then it's also not very good for white, because first black has a very strong centralized bishop onto d4, and secondly black can play queen to b6, chasing that dark squared bishop, putting pressure onto the white's f2 pawn, and all in all, right now black became an attacker side. So this is not what white wants. In the real game instead, white simply took onto d4, and right now black has no problems, and they agreed to draw in a few moves. This is the next game, Anand-Gelfand, and here black played bishop takes d5. That's the position I'd like to discuss. What would you do here as white? The first thing we should pay attention on is that here white has 3 different options, and each of them lead to a separate, specific position. In such cases, when you face such a branching point, first of all, it makes sense to think hard and to invest enough time to find the best continuation. The next important thing is that you should not only think about the best move, but more importantly, you should compose a clear plan. And once you've found such a clear plan, you may go into this way and realize it. Having that in mind, let's analyze this position more specifically. In the actual game, Anand took with the c-pawn, but that created a quite symmetric position, and they agreed to draw very soon. Having white pieces, we would like to play for a win, so let's reject this line and think about something else. The most natural move is queen takes d5, because that leaves the d-file opened, and therefore white will be able to put pressure on the black's backward pawn onto d6. At first glance it looks very natural and very promising, but upon closer examination we can see that black can hold the d6 pawn pretty easily. He will play queen c7, then rook to d8, and there is nothing white can do about it. At the very least, black always can go bishop e7, and the d6 pawn will be protected. All in all, this situation is okay for white, but it's quite hard to find a real way to break through. So let's go back. The last option is e takes d5. Now black will probably move back to e7 or b8. Knight to b8 looks quite promising, because black is going to transfer this knight to c5. In that case, he will blockade the white's pawn majority on the queen side, and white will have no prospects at all. Therefore, white has to play c5, because this is the only way to break the black's plan. Now white is sacrificing the pawn for gaining inactivity. After d takes, white will push d6, and although of course we can't calculate all consequences of this positional sacrifice, still it looks quite good for white in view of many good factors. First, white opened a long diagonal for his light squared bishop. Next, white has a very powerful passed pawn onto d6, and with this pawn white also has a space advantage. Next, white can support this pawn by rook from the d1. Also, black's pawns on the 5th rank are a bit weak, and all these factors proves that white's sacrifice should be good, and white definitely has a quite good position and a lot of compensation. Of course, it was a very brief analysis, but I just wanted to show you the right way of thinking in critical positions. When you face such a branching point, then you need to keep in mind 2 main rules. The first one is that you need to think hard and determine the best way. And the next tip is that you need to think not only about your following move, but you need to find the clear plan. And once you found it, then everything will go smoothly. This is the next game. This time Anand is playing black. Here we can see a typical position with an isolated pawn. And by the way, right now this pawn is under an attack. course, black can protect the pawn by playing rook to d8. This was played in several games, by the way. There is nothing wrong with this move rook to d8, however, it's a step in the wrong direction. You see, when you have an isolated pawn, your opponent has a clear plan to blockade it and to attack it. In this position, for instance, white will continue his development and will put more and more pressure onto this weak pawn onto the d-file. Maybe black will be able to keep the position, maybe not, but in any case black will have to face a tough defense. Of course, it's not what black really wants, and that's why there is a general rule. When you have an isolated pawn, you should play actively. With that in mind, Anand decided to realize an interesting positional sacrifice. He simply castled. There is another instructive idea behind this move also. Actually, this is quite a well-known idea, but nevertheless we often forget about it. So here it is. Before starting a defense, you should ask yourself the following question. What is a drawback of my opponent's plan? This will turn your mind in the right direction and will help you find more aggressive moves. For instance, in this position, white is putting pressure on the black's d5 pawn, that's right. But at the same time, white neglects the development of his queenside forces. If white really grabs the d5 pawn, this will open a position which can be dangerous due to his undeveloped position. This was played in the game. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes. Here black played rook to c8, preparing a discovered attack of the white's queen. If white wants to save his extra pawn, he should remove the queen from this eventual attack. The most advanced and most aggressive square is the f5 square. Here white is ready to go rook to d7, and therefore black will probably reply rook to d8. And now really everything goes quite good for black. White still cannot complete his development, because if white tries bishop to d2, black will simply take on to d5, and now white is losing. If he takes queen to c8, black will go back rook to d8, taking the queen, and on the next move the d2 bishop will be lost. After rook takes d5, white can also recapture, but still black goes rook d8, and with this tactical motif, white can save both of his pieces. If white tries more unpretentious move queen e2, then still black has a few ways to keep white's forces undeveloped. The one idea is to make an interesting move queen f6, keep an eye on the b2 pawn and preventing white from playing bishop d2. Also, black has a more simple way. He can go queen to e4, taking the rook, and then rook to d8. If white plays queen d3, offering an exchange, black can do that because after an exchange of the white's few active pieces, there will be no active warriors in the white's army. Into this variation, all white's developed pieces were traded, and right now black is ready to go rook to d1 mate, while white's queenside forces are still dozing and can help white. Of course, it's not what white wants, and all these lines proves the correctness of black's sacrifice. In the game, Gelfand played the most accurate move bishop to d2. Now black can take back the pawn, bishop takes e3, making a discovered attack. White played bishop c3, covering his queen. There followed bishop b6 and queen to f5. Now the position becomes approximately equal, but still there was one interesting moment here. Anand played queen to e6, and at first sight it seems like black is just trying to simplify a position, and he's ready to worsen his pawn structure for a bit, just to neutralize the white's pressure. In light of that, white really could go into this line and then try to attack the black's weak pawns like e6 and black's weaknesses on the 7th rank. However, everything is not that simple. In fact, queen e6 move is a very clever snare, because if white tries queen takes e6, black has a very sudden counter blow, bishop takes f2. If white takes the bishop, which is a mistake, black will take f takes e6, and suddenly this is a discovered attack on the white's rook and king. On the next move, white will lose a rook and black will get a decisive material advantage. To be honest, this variation is not that much dangerous for white, because instead of king takes f2, white can simply go away, but still, of course, this variation is more favorable for black. In light of that, we can make an important practical conclusion. After an opponent's move, you should ask yourself what is an idea behind this move and why did he play it. It's especially important to implement this technique if opponent's move is strange or unexpected. If you ask yourself what is an idea behind an opponent's last move, you will always be aware of his plans and will never overlook his tricky ideas and will never make a blunder. In the game, Gelfand played queen to a3 and they agreed to draw in a few moves. So far we observed the first 6 games of this match Anand-Gelfand, and in the next videos we'll analyze the rest. Thanks for watching and talk to you soon.